Welcome to the Hollywood Makers podcast, where we explore stories with leaders and innovators shaping the creative industry. My name is Rossy Eguigure, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Ana-Christina Ramón. Dr. Ramón is the director of UCLA Media and Entertainment Initiative. We're very excited to share her knowledge. Also, she will talk about her career and discuss the findings of the Hollywood Diversity Film Reports that were released earlier this year. Welcome, Dr. Ramón. How are you?
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. Since I've read the release of the report, for me, it was at the beginning, and the second one, I think it was in May. I shared that in my platforms, and I was so excited. And, we've been back and forth because I've been traveling and you also have been busy, but I'm so excited that you're here. But the first part that I like for our audience to know is about your career, Dr. Ramón, because your journey, I think, is very interesting. You are the founder of this section in the UCLA, the Media and Entertainment Research Initiative, correct? And I'd like to know how you got there, how your studies in psychology and social psychology took you there.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about that. And also the name of the initiative is the Entertainment and Media Research Initiative, just to make sure that, the audience
thank you.
knows the full name. But my journey is I'm the daughter of immigrants. My dad is from Peru and my mom is from Mexico. And I was born and raised here in Los Angeles. So, very much part of a working class, immigrant family. And it was interesting because the fact that now I study entertainment. When I was growing up, my dad was a huge fan of Hollywood. He would always have us watch all these old movies and all the classic films. And so my sister and I were just always became like experts of old Hollywood. Oh. And then we would also go see movies almost once a week. And so even just as kids, we would definitely just be at every big movie we would definitely attend, which is reflective of the findings of Latinx audiences of today. So it's definitely something interesting that now I study it, but I definitely lived it even as a kid growing up. And so my journey, in terms of the research that I do is from undergraduate, I went straight to graduate school and studied social psychology because social psychology really fascinated me when I first took a class in college. I was just fascinated by the idea of how the individual is affected by the group and how the group is affected by the individual, basically. So it's really just focusing in on the context and how somebody isn't necessarily going to behave in the same way throughout all kinds of conditions. They can act very differently depending on certain conditions that they're living in or that they're experiencing. And so I always found that really fascinating, but the focus that I was drawn to was learning about race, ethnicity, and gender, which always, was something that I obviously as a woman of color, I experienced it, myself, and I always wanted to just study it further. And I've been an analytical person since I was young, and so for me, social psychology really embodied everything that I was interested in. And so from that time, just being in college, I wanted to definitely study it. And so I've been studying race and ethnicity and gender since 1998, pretty much. So it's been a long time since I've been researching these topics. But entry into studying entertainment was really just started when I started working at UCLA. I was an assistant director at the Ralph J. Bunche Center for African American Studies, and working with Dr. Darnell Hunt, who is a professor of African American Studies and sociology at UCLA. He is also now the provost and executive vice chancellor. And so his area of expertise is in race and media. And the work that we did at the Bunche Center, since he was the director of the Bunche Center at the time when I first started working at UCLA, we did several projects. But then in around 2011, we started really focusing in on this area, which was his specialty. And, as I mentioned earlier, when growing up, I've always been kind of just a fan of movies and television, but also, just somebody that obviously is very analytical. So I really welcomed examining Hollywood a little further. And so the way that this report series that you mentioned came about was that Dr. Hunt and I really wanted to try to see if we could examine Hollywood in terms of what was going on with representation and really trying to standardize that study in terms of race, ethnicity, and gender. And so at the time, nobody was really studying particularly race, ethnicity. There was some other groups that were studying gender, and some of the racial and ethnic advocacy organizations had studied representation in terms of television shows, but they weren't able to really gather the data in a very standardized way. So we saw that there was a gap in the research there. And so when we embarked on this study, we actually met with some executives in Hollywood, and what they had told us was that they thought, the diversity executives that we were meeting with were those, at the time the term diversity, equity, and inclusion wasn't necessarily like the full term. It was just like they were diversity, quote unquote, diversity executives. And so they would tell us that they understood the importance of the issue, because most of them were also people of color, but they said nobody else is really going to pay attention if you start doing this research unless you connect it to the bottom line. And so we thought, okay, then that's definitely a challenge that we want to accept. We want to then look at representation in a very standardized fashion, and then also connect it to the bottom line in terms of box office and television ratings. And so that's really how we started the work that we did. And what also I think was different at the time, and that maybe people also don't fully understand when they hear about the research, is in the past, those organizations that I told you would give like maybe report cards and they would study television shows, they would get the data directly from the studios about who was in the shows and who was represented in those shows. And they would get that data from the studio. Well, we decided that we weren't going to collect the data in that way, because we wanted to, as I mentioned, have it in a very standardized fashion. We wanted to do it as social scientists. We understood the importance of being able to compare the data in a way that was the same, so that we would collect it in the same manner. We weren't collecting it in a way that would be biased by whatever the studios wanted to send us or the networks wanted to send us.
And I like to go specifically in the difference of the way that you conducted that research. But I also wanted to go back first, just tell my audience that we're talking with Dr. Ana-Christina Ramón. In your journey, your career journey, when you mentioned that you study social psychology, my master is in media psychology, and I worked as a media producer for more than 30 years. But I really like that, specifically what you said is the
Yeah,
impact of our surroundings, right? The environmental
exactly.
psychology also touches on that. But I am so excited because it's one of the things that you just mentioned is when the studio executives told you that people who are head of these departments of DEI, for example, if they are people of color, okay, they understand more, but there are some others that don't. Eh, Precisely because you conducted the study differently as a scientist, what challenges did you face when doing that, and what specifically things did you do differently from other studies?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the one thing that we wanted to do, like I said, is, and it was based on previous experience because Dr. Hunt had worked with those racial and ethnic advocacy organizations on helping them collect the data that they had demanded from the studios and networks. And at that, it was around 1998, 1999, where there was a memorandum of understanding that was produced, that was between the studios, networks, and the racial ethnic advocacy organizations. And at that time, it was the organizations really going to the studios and demanding more representation because they, saw that there was such limited representation, and on, especially on television shows and in films as well, but especially on TV. And so the work that they did really helped create like those early diversity officers that later on ended up being eliminated, because like this has been going on for so long. A lot of people think
Mhm.
that this is just maybe like a recent issue or something from the past
No.
10 years, but this has been going on obviously for decades in Hollywood. So there's always like these hills and valleys in terms of the diversity that's seen, particularly in television, throughout like this many decades. You can see the changes that have been going on. And so at that time there was really like a lot of demand for it, and it was also, I think, related to like the Oscars, and like that there wasn't any nominations given for people of color. And so anyway, so that's just like those reports were report cards that those organizations would produce. But it was like basically comparing apples to oranges, because every studio or network would supply the organizations with different types of data. So sometimes it was data that would make them look the best, right? So it wasn't necessarily complete, and it wasn't, it was very difficult to compare, um, as social scientists, to understand to compare it across the studios, right? So because they were
Mhm.
all giving the organizations different types of data, incomplete data, or possibly, data that wasn't trying to make them look the best, right? And so
Mhm.
we didn't want to have to worry about that. So we tried to look for what would be a way just to find out the people who are working in the industry in these key positions, and to really find a way to collect the data from sources that are not going to be biased. And so we found that if we just went by the credits, then we could then uncover that. So we used, early on, we used just Studio System, and it's a database that Hollywood uses to really find out like who's working in the industry, and it's owned by Gracenote, which is now owned by Nielsen. And so the other one is just IMDb, that everyone is completely familiar with.
Mhm.
So at that time, the data that was available on those databases or those systems that people would look up, it wasn't very in depth, right? So
Mhm.
it was kind of very basic. There was just some basic demographic data, So oftentimes, we would just use it just to have an idea about the credits. And then we would have to really investigate each person. So we wanted to look at the main cast. We wanted to look at, for TV shows, we wanted to look at the show creators, the directors of the episodes, the writers that were credited during a TV season. So not just everyone in the writer's room, but we wanted to really focus in on who's getting credit, right, for during a TV season for their writing. So then, obviously we looked at the actors, the main cast. So, especially for television shows, we wanted to look at the regular cast members, the not just recurring. We wanted to, see who is getting those roles that are, very much the ones that are paid the most, right? And so, and that people will see throughout the season. So we really focused in on that for movies. We also, studied movies as well at the same time. And we really also just focused on the directors, the screenwriters, and the actors for that. And so when we first started out, it was like very difficult to, the data wasn't like complete, like I said. And so we were really just working off the credits, and then we really had to investigate every person, find out their race, ethnicity, and gender, because that was the data that was available at the time. Other identity groups and other identities of the people working was not available when we first started doing this research in 2011. And it was not available in terms of like a publicly accessible, database, like the ones that we were using. And so that's where we really focused in on, because our background was as race, ethnicity, and gender, experts. So the data that we collected, obviously, is very labor intensive. And like I said, at the time, it was like there wasn't as complete of data. And since then, it has grown. Like Variety had a database that they call Variety Insight. Now it's called Luminate Film and Television and TV. And so they also are another source that we can look into for various, kind of information regarding film and television. And so when we first started out, we also started out doing everything that was on television, including reality shows. But then that became something that was very difficult to manage, just because you can imagine there were so many shows. And so around 2020, we started publishing the reports in 2014, but around 2020, we really started just focusing on live action, scripted content for television. But for film, we've always just really focused in on the top films at the global box office. And so that was something that, we hadn't changed. So that for films, we include animation. But for television shows, we no longer have like animated shows in our database, just because it was so difficult to really gather all that data. So we really started focusing in on what people were really asking us more about, and that was always about the scripted content for television.
And so, what have you, the trends, because this has been like 10 years since you first published, but you started in 2011, you said, but 2014, the first one?
So, Oh yeah, go ahead. The trends.
No, what have you observed? Because it is a decade, and also the media and the technology, everything has changed.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
What are the main findings on the trends that you have observed over the years?
Yeah, definitely. So the first publication was in 2014, but the data that's been included in our longitudinal kind of analysis dates back to 2011. So we do have the data from 2011 for film, all the way to 2023. And then for television, we have the data from 2011, 2012 TV season, all the way to, I think it's 2021, 22. TV season. And so it's interesting because at the time, the number of there was the plurality of shows were almost all white casts, right? And films. And since then, it's completely flipped. And so the overall cast became more and more diverse. And so it was interesting because at the time when we first started and our first findings of that first report, even though there was a limited number of shows and films that had diverse casts, those are the ones that we found did relatively the best, right? And so when we looked at like kind of the median of in terms of box office success and in terms of TV ratings, we found that diversity really sells, right? And so that it is profitable.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because, like I said, it was just like there's been this gradual change. So we started publishing in 2014, showing these findings from 2011 on. And then you can just see in our study, when you look at the longitudinal chart, that you can see the progression to more and more diversity. So now the plurality of those the shows are diverse shows, so that there are shows that have majority BIPOCs, with Black, Indigenous, people of color in their cast. But just in terms of, there's been a varying degrees of leads, depending on what year, depending on what platform, depending on whether it's television or film. But for the most part, particularly for film, there's been a really disconnect in terms of like the leads haven't increased as much for Black, Indigenous, people of color, but the definitely the supporting roles have increased, right? And so for television, it's been kind of just like there's like this variation in terms of what you see on screen, but it's definitely much more diverse than it was back in 2011. Oftentimes what you'll see, especially in television, is that the most diverse shows have like a white lead still, or a
Yeah.
white
Yeah, they
male
do.
lead and a white female lead, and then everyone else is a Black, Indigenous, person of color. So
Yeah.
it's very interesting that that there's like this increase in diversity, but it doesn't always benefit then the lead role, right? And then also, one of our report subtitles was A Tale of Two Hollywoods, because of the fact that in front of the camera there was like this visual diversity, but behind the camera there has been still kind of like a bit of a struggle, particularly for film, in terms of having directors of color and writers of color. And so those two positions are especially for film, are very much dominated by white males.
And I see there are so many. Please go and check these stories. There are two different studies released this year. But one of the findings, another finding from the studies, shows that streaming platforms are leading the way in terms of diversity compared to theatrical releases. Why do you think this happened? And what do you think theatrical production could do to improve this?
Yeah, exactly. So that's what's like really interesting, is that the model is already there, right? So the model exists of when you give somebody the opportunity, they can shine, right? And so you can see that in streaming, the numbers are just so much better, right? In terms of, like what you said, in terms of what you see on screen and who you see behind the scenes. But it's almost in the sense of like, where for the film industry, they see it as the major leagues and the minor leagues, right? And the minor leagues are very much the streaming platforms, and the major leagues are very much the theatrical, industry, in of itself. That's like such a huge huge part of Hollywood.
Yeah.
So streaming obviously, has expanded just exponentially in the past, 5 to 7 years, but it's now contracting like the rest of Hollywood. But that was where, especially younger, BIPOC directors and filmmakers, that's where they would get an opportunity perhaps to be able to create their own film or to work on a film that was already, in the works. And so it's really interesting to see that, but then you see the pitfalls of it, right? So you get the opportunity to do a streaming film, but you really don't have any receipts that you can show. You can maybe say that your film was on the top 10 list for a couple of weeks
Yeah.
on one of the platforms, but there's no way to really say like because like you don't get that data, right? You can't say my film was the reason that this many subscribers, joined this platform. You
And
can't
that's,
say, my
yeah.
film was the reason that this much money was brought in, or this is how it was profitable. But when you have a theatrical release, you can definitely say that. You can
Yeah,
easily,
and that's one of the problems. Thank you for mentioning that. That's one of the problems that I see with all these fast channels, which at the beginning I had so much hope, but then all these fast channel is ad revenue, and then you send them all your content, bring all your content, and people have hopes, independent filmmakers, but then they don't have. Then they say, "Oh, you didn't have enough clicks." I remember someone told me about a story. If someone sending a lot of films from Mexico, by the way, to Pluto TV, I will mention, and at the end, it's free content that all these filmmakers are doing, and then they don't have any credit for that or any revenue, by the way. But I'm gonna
yeah,
go then to this other question. Since we have shown not just your story, which is, by the way, I keep repeating, please go to I'm gonna put the information, the link information for the studies, but the studies have shown that the box office success has to do with diversity.
yeah,
And in your story, you mentioned like, for example, the cast in Barbie, but recently, just a few months ago, I don't know when the audience will be listening to this, but for example,
yeah,
others during this summer showed that again. But again, we've always, and there are other stories that show that in Hollywood is losing $30 billion. And that's what I wanted to have you here, because
yeah.
they're not listening. Why do you think they're not listening?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's kind of it's more of a sociological, psychological, my co-author, Dr. Hunt, is a sociologist. Like I said,
Mhm.
it's a bit of the like research, that we do. It's more of like an institutional issue, right? In terms
Mm.
of letting go of power in the industry. And so it's just easier for them to do the status quo and just to make minor tweaks in response to like demands for diversity, or in response to being told that, yeah, you can make more money. And so then they always, think like, oh, okay, well, we'll just put a little bit more, Black, Indigenous, people of color into, like I said, the supporting roles. And it always just takes like, it has to be like certain executives that really push for certain things. And
Mhm.
so they've been very slow, right? So the changes that you've seen have been very incremental over the years. But I think that this year is really a good, just like we were saying, like I'm not sure when people are going to hear this, but really when you look at 2024,
Mhm.
it's really a clear like example of when you do invest in diversity, that it does benefit you. So in a
Yeah.
time when people are kind of not like fully excited and passionate about going to the theaters, which I think really was a big drop off from like the second half of the year last year, because of the fact that, with the strikes, there wasn't really a lot of promotion. So there wasn't like really
Mhm.
a lot of excitement going around. There wasn't after Barbie and Oppenheimer, there weren't really any big draws, to people going to the movies. There was obviously, still good movies coming out, but there wasn't like, they couldn't really do a lot of marketing. So people were like, yeah, that's fine. Do I really, like there were still people going to the theaters, right? But it wasn't as, something that then I think was as top of mind because, people can see movies at home when they can watch them on streaming. And so then when you don't keep the excitement going, then there could be a drop off. So then you can see in 2024 that now the audiences that Hollywood is so used to taking advantage of, they're like, well, I don't think I'm gonna see this movie right away, like, or it's just like, a smaller amount of people that are getting excited. And so you could see that with, the Fall Guy in its opening weekend, how there wasn't as much excitement. But then you see with Bad Boys, 4, that there was, right? And that really was like kind of a kickoff to seeing that, like, if you give people what they want, because basically they want to see something that is a big blockbuster that they're already invested in, which is a brand that they're invested in, and it's for the Black, Indigenous, people of color, the audiences that Hollywood has taken really for granted for so long. They are now like, I will, come out in droves only for something that really excites me, and I'm not just going to come out just because you're telling me it's a big blockbuster with another white lead. So you have to make it something that like really is worth my time, is really something that I really am going to get, fear of missing out, right? A lot of FOMO over. And so for movies that have these BIPOC leads, those movies have so far done really well. And for animation, like the movie that you mentioned, Inside Out, for the Latinx audience, animated films are always huge draws. And so it's not surprising when they're, a large part of the audience.
Yes.
It's
And I
really
think,
something that people have to be already like invested in. But when you give them a little bit something more that they feel connected to, that's when it pays off. And for me, I see it as like when you're giving them BIPOC leads that
and,
are part
and
of
thank
whole
you
franchises.
thank you for giving those examples because it's like that. And I remember when I heard about the numbers that were showing that Inside Out was doing so good in other two movies, and that Latino families were going to watch that, and
Yeah.
those were the numbers recently. But also the the examples that you give, the Fall Guy, I like Ryan Gosling, but
Yeah.
Incredible Bad Boys did better, not incredible, but it was Miami, it was these guys, and a lot of people went for that other movie. So that is a really great example that shows that.
Yeah, and
I
then also
Mhm.
the A Quiet Place, that did really well as well. Its opening weekend, and that was, with Lupita Nyong'o, and so she, as the lead is a big draw. So it's like infusing these well-known franchises with people of color or more people of color, is really a formula that works. And so Hollywood is built on formulas. And
Yeah.
so that's like, you can see that, it's not like they've only done these movies though with people of color, but you can see whenever they make that decision that it really pays off. And so it's a contrast to just having any old movie with just a white and a white male lead and a white female lead, that they've like just assumed that, oh, Black and Indigenous people of color are gonna come out no matter what. But it's like, yeah, they come out, but they're not gonna come out like in droves and really give you a huge hit, right? If there's no connection to it. And so
Yeah.
it's like Hollywood has to do a little bit more work and invest in the right, kind of formula. And to me, that formula is having a BIPOC lead, in a
And behind the
franchise that's
scenes.
well known.
Yes, and behind the scenes crew, based on what you're saying, in what I've seen, all these I want to go back to before the pandemic or even 2018. I remember I was working in development of a documentary, and it was about the different people, because I didn't understand what was happening, after 2016, and why people didn't understand each other, the division and everything. And when I was, ready to pitch that thing, um, all the posters and movies and everything in 2018 were with, you could see were people of color in the poster. That's what I'm saying. And I say, oh, because people were, okay, we had, the trends that came,
Yeah,
and DI trend came and everything like that. But actually, it's like you said, they have to go deeper, because it's not only obviously that they have a protagonist, the main
yeah,
leads roles, but also the behind the scene crew, not only because writers obviously and directors, but I think, okay, they are showing in the posters all these people. They always have to have a African American, maybe a Latino, by the way, because they leave it at the end. I have to
yeah,
say that. And then they have all the other. When they said the DI trend is, we have to have an African American there, and okay, let's see an Asian, and okay, Latinos, but then I see, so saying that is when I'm going to the next question. I think the lack of unity among us Latinos is really a major factor that is keeping us behind in the industry. But what do you think about that?
yeah. I mean, I think that there's always been, like, especially for Latinx community in Hollywood, there was always like this issue of there could only be one, and that was
Mm-hmm.
because Hollywood really made it very difficult. There was such limited roles, and there was usually, just one major role, at a time, right? For a while. So it was always kind of, I think, a struggle, and they created like a sense of competition especially among actors, right? And so, super limited opportunities as it continues today in terms of for filmmakers and for writers, but that who are Latinx. But I think it's definitely was in previous era, there was, definitely the sense of a competition, and that if somebody gets the role, then there are no more
Yeah.
roles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that made it difficult for people to work together. So from what I've seen, though, um probably the past 10 years, is that now younger, actors, writers, and directors, they're working more and more together, right? So they're kind of taking their own agency, and to
Mm-hmm.
not talking about like actual like an agency, but like they have their, their own kind of drive to really just bring the community together, to work together, right? To find networks, to create their own networks, to create their own productions and stuff. And so I've seen a lot more of that in terms of working together in Hollywood. But yeah, I mean, I think that overall, because of the fact that the Latinx community is not a monolith, and that there's so many countries represented, right? There's so many different experiences that the Latinx community has within the United States, that it does make it difficult oftentimes, right, to really bring everyone together. And so I think that that's continues to probably be a little bit difficult, but I do see that there is more kind of networking going on in Hollywood, and I'm hopeful that that will improve. One other thing
Yes.
I also wanted to mention about that, though, in terms of the audience, there is kind of like a bit of a myth that like the Latinx audience doesn't support Latinx films or TV shows. And that's actually incorrect, because it's like, if they are aware of a TV show, and if it gets good in marketing, and if it has somebody that they recognize that's the lead in the TV show, or that's prominently kind of starring in the TV show or film, they do support it. But what happens is that just because they support it doesn't will not be the reason that it's a hit. Like, it would have to be just like an overwhelming number for them to support it, for something to be a hit. An example of that is Encanto. The opening weekend of Encanto, when that came out, that had 56% of its audience was Latinx. So that was huge. So that was the reason why it was number one. But it's like it would be so difficult to have like every Latinx movie have that like large of a number, of Latinx people coming out to see it. And so, it's super rare to have that high. The usual kind of like really high numbers for the Latinx community, which is only about 20% of the population, is really like if you get in the 35% range to, like, I've seen like maybe 42%, then that's a huge number. But it's really just getting everyone else to come and see, the films, right? So for the Latinx community, they can support something at like, in the 30% range that has more Latinos in the cast, but you really need, everyone else to come and see it, because then otherwise it can't be a hit, because you just definitely need more viewers. Like, the Latinx community can't carry it by itself.
Yes, and that's what I think is the to ensure that we as a collective work together, and not, again, like you said, I'm always saying that we live in a multicultural world, and that's the way I understand it. By the way, you being the daughter of a Peruvian mother and Mexican father, and I'm from Honduras, but I was basically raised professional, especially in Miami. We have a Cuban family, so having all this mix, I think, helps me understand also that
Yeah.
the differences within the Hispanic community, Latinx community.
Yeah, definitely. Right. So that, yeah, my mom's actually she's Mexican, and my
Oh,
dad's
she's
Peruvian.
Mexican. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it's like, very similar. But yeah, so I think that having that experience, in my family, then I definitely see the differences in, how like global perspective and, experiences growing up in the US, and how they differ for different groups. And then obviously, like the research that I do as well. So that's why, I mean, it's definitely something difficult to really, when you have to bring everyone under an umbrella, but
Yes,
there's obviously so many different, so many, besides all the differences, there's so many things that we have in common
of
that
course.
does make sense in terms of our cultural connection, right? And so,
Okay.
and it's interesting in terms of the audience behavior, because just because, like, the fact that, like, with the what we were talking about earlier for animation, the Latinx community has from the start really been, huge in terms of making sure that animated movies, are hits. Like, they're the driving force because
Yeah.
they are the biggest part of that audience. So at 20% of the population, their demographic is younger skewing, right?
Yeah.
So they have a younger skewing, but then also, like, we tend to have like larger families, and when we go to the theaters, we bring almost everyone from our family,
Yes.
right? And
Uh-huh.
so we're very much invested in watching family films, so that we can all watch it together without any concern, even though
Yeah.
you see still like Latinx families bring young kids to like films that maybe are not for their age range, but because nobody gets left at home, so
Yeah.
that's why we're such avid theater goers. But you can see that can get pulled back, right? If there's an easier, more convenient way to watch films, and kind of the just always thinking that the Latinx audiences can be taken for granted is very much faulty, and that's
Yeah.
what unfortunately a lot of executives continue to assume, right? And
Yes.
from the data that I've seen, particularly during the time of the pandemic, that's something that, the first year in 2020, the Latinx audience probably saved the theatrical industry. But
Yeah.
after that, it like waned a little bit. There wasn't as much excitement, right, to go. they were kind of the Latinx audience was, kind of just like everyone else, thinking like, well, I could just watch this at home.
Yeah.
And so then, I would say like last year was a bit of a resurgence for the first part of the year. But this year it'll be interesting to see like the full year's worth of data, if it goes back down, and if there's really more of a kind of a way that the behavior will be more like that, they will be more choosy about like what they want to go out and spend their money on. But I mean, it's definitely there. The if you see that the Latinx audience is like 25% of some opening weekend, to me, even though that's still over the usual percentage for a big major wide release film, 25% for the Latinx audience isn't huge. To me, it's you have to be in the 30 something percent range to see that's like that they're really excited about a movie, right? So
Mm-hmm.
25% is really just kind of standard
Yes.
like audience, Latinx audience behavior for a big movie.
And
So because oftentimes you'll just hear people say like, oh well, you still had this many Latinx people go see it, but it's like, well, if you only got 25% of the Latinx audience, then they weren't that excited to see your movie, unfortunately, because that's just like they'll see anything at 25% of the audience, they're
yes,
not as excited. So anyway, so
hopefully they listen. I really
yeah,
I am seeing as a Gen X media producer, who loves to adapt to everything new, that everything is changing. And
exactly.
so the last question that I have for you is an advice for emerging filmmakers. But I wanted to say, when you were mentioning the animation, I love Inside Out, and I love obviously Encantos, but Coco really made me cry.
Yeah,
I don't celebrate the Day of the Dead, but oh wow, that was like, oh my God, everybody should celebrate that way, right?
yeah,
So yes, it's, I think, because we our emotions and how we are relatable, it doesn't matter, because, by the way, Inside Out, it's not a story about a Latino country, because sometimes people think that it's just emotions, and we all
yeah.
relate to that. That last question, again, this has been so great for the audience, but because of who you're representing, I think you're very inspiring, not just the journey that you have taken in your career and how you're helping with your science and helping others. But I'm focusing in emerging filmmakers, and especially young Latinas. What advice would you give to them if they want to either enter the media and entertainment field or contribute to this change from the beginning?
Yeah, I think that, right now there's a lot of kind of doom and gloom going around, but because, Hollywood is contracting, but I think that Hollywood is changing. And so when there's that situation in any kind of field, there's like opportunity there, right? There's opportunity for innovation. And so I think as somebody that is a young filmmaker, they can see this as, an opportunity for them to be at the start of something new and exciting, right? So if Hollywood is changing and transforming, then there's something new that's gonna come out, right? And so I think that instead of like maybe, kind of feeling like, wow, like will I have a place, in this industry? I think that they should look at it as like this opportunity for them to really make a big impact. And so the most important thing then is to find other people that are doing the same thing, to work with them, to really hone their craft, and to really create their own network, of other people that can do various roles in the industry, like with them, right? So that they can help them create a film, so they can learn from other filmmakers, they can shadow other filmmakers, but also that they create a network of people that do all types of different roles that can help them, with a film, right? And so there's definitely a lot of really good organizations out there, especially in the Latinx community, a lot of filmmaker organizations, a lot of, especially I think Latina organizations that they can join, and they can meet other people that are working in the industry and that are also like, young like them, or you don't have to necessarily be young, but maybe just new to the industry. And so I think that, to me, it's like you have to just see it as like the glass half full and not half empty, right? And so that perhaps whatever they can come up with will be something that will really change the industry.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ana-Christina. She's the Director of Entertainment and Media Initiative Research at UCLA. And we're going to have all the links for the studies, the Hollywood Diversity Film Reports that were done this year by you. I really, really, really appreciate you being here at the Hollywood Makers.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us at the Hollywood Makers podcast. We hope you enjoy our conversation with Dr. Ana-Christina Ramón. Please don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more stories from leaders and innovators shaping the creative industry. My name is Rossy Eguigure. Stay inspired and keep creating.